friends, it's RSKT, and welcome back to another episode of the AE Modular Video Library, the series that takes a look at the wide range of modules available for the AE Modular system. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2 sample and hold module. We'll be giving a general overview before diving into some demo patches. Before we begin, AE Modular is a small but ever-growing system, so if you find this video useful, be sure to like and subscribe or consider supporting me on Patreon. The videos in the series can be found in a playlist on my channel and can be viewed in any order. Green thumbnails are used for official Tangible Waves modules, and pink thumbnails are used to cover third-party modules. With that said, let's take a look at 2 sample and hold. So one could probably argue that no modular rack is complete without a sample and hold module in there. They're incredibly useful for creating sort of randomized CV voltages, and you can even use it to create a sequencer. To give you a general idea of what we can do to modulate things, I'm just going to take a square wave and plug it into a wasp filter. And then we'll take the wasp filter output and plug it into our mixer. Then we'll just take our mixer's output and plug it into the master module. Cool, so we've got that set up for now. Now let's say that we wanted to randomly modulate the filter cutoff on this wasp filter. Well, while we have LFOs and other things available to us for generating CV, we don't have a random LFO anywhere in this rack. So we need to make one ourselves. The way that we would go about doing that is by taking a noise module. And just to give you an idea, it goes without saying, but just to give you an idea of what this sounds like. We've got some random white noise. And if we were to plug this into a scope, we'd see that it's sort of generating values up and down all over the place. I've just loaded up the scope on the EuroPie down here for now. And there we go. If we plug this into the digital input, play around with the rate even, we can see that we're getting some different sort of CV values. We could plug this into analog as well, but yeah, we can see that this thing is all over the place and we're getting like this sort of white noise effect. I hope that my camera is picking that up, but don't get too hung up on it because it's not really overly important for what we're about to do. So we're going to take that and plug it into the input of our sample and hold module. But you'll notice that at the moment, nothing's happening. And that's because we need to trigger it somehow. So there's lots of different things that we could use to trigger it. We could use an LFO. I just find it rather easy to trigger it with something like the Euclid grid, just because the sequence is nice and visible for the camera. So we'll plug that into the trigger and press clock. And now we can see that every time one of these yellow lights is passed over by the sequence playhead, we can see that this light changes to a random value. Now, given the fact that we're just modulating the filter cutoff on a wasp filter here, we can just go straight from the sample and hold and attenuate the signal to be stronger or less strong using this CV knob. So let's have a listen to that. So now if we were to increase the steps on our Euclid grid down here, we can hear that it's triggering more frequently. Now, it's important to keep in mind that not every module has an attenuator built into it. So if that is the case for whatever you're using it with, you might want to take this output into an attenuator first. And then we can take the output of that and plug it into a wasp filter. And now if we turn this up, we can control the attenuated amount with this knob. So not only is that useful for modulating other modules without an attenuator built in, but it's also extremely useful for performance, because although this does have a CV knob up here that I can use during a performance, it's often buried underneath the massive cables that are running to my envelopes and VCAs. So I prefer to patch things this way so that while I'm performing, I've just got a nice clear open spot down here that I can control. So I'm just going to unpatch that for now. And let's keep that same square wave, but let's now plug it into a VCA. We're going to trigger the VCA with an envelope. And let's trigger the envelope with this purple sequence down here. Great. Now we can take our VCA's output, plug it into our WASP filter, and then take the WASP filter's output into our mixer. Great. So that's obviously one way of using a sequencer, is by using the Euclid grid for something like that. The only problem with this method is that at the moment we're just using it to trigger our envelope, and it's not really doing anything creative with pitch. We don't have a pitch sequencer going. So we can actually go ahead and use the sample and hold to create something like that. And I guess this is kind of like using a really hacky Turing machine, for example. Now you could use something like a LFO for this, like a triangle waved LFO. That's definitely one way that you could do it. You could also generate something using the noise module and sample and hold, much like we did before, and then run it into the second sample and hold. But instead of all of that, I'm going to use a really useful third-party module that I've got up here, which is 2Auto. Basically, with 2Auto, I can twist the knob, and then you can see that it loops whatever I do. The beauty of it is that we can also trigger that so that it's happening in time with our sequence. So if I give this a twist, just sort of loop something around. There we go. So every time this blue light is triggered, it resets what I'm doing up here. So I'm pretty sure that you can see where I'm going with this now, but what I can do is take the output of that, plug it into our sample and hold. And then we could even just, we could take anything else that we wanted, to be honest, but I'm just going to take a duplicate of our gate sequence here and plug it into the trigger. Cool. So now we've got this little light going. Now, obviously, our oscillator, if we patch this directly, it's going to be pretty all over the place. And I want to tighten the reins a little bit. So we'll do what we said before and plug this into an attenuator first, just so that we've got a little bit more control over the range of notes. We'll take the output of our attenuator. We'll hook it up to the CV input on our oscillator. And now let's slowly bring this change in. Now, obviously, that's pretty awful. So I'm going to open up the menu of my EuroPi over here, and we're going to choose the quantizer because it's the only quantizer that I've got in my rack. So let's hook this up to the analog input on our quantizer. And now I find that this quantizer works best if it is triggered, and we're going to trigger that with the exact same sequence. So instead of inputting to our sample and hold, I'm going to whack it into a mult down here. We're going to run that mult to the input of our sample and hold again, so that it's still set up the same way as before. And now we're going to take a copy of that and plug it into the digital input. Then finally, we need to take that quantized signal and patch it into our CV control up the top here. Cool. We crank this down a little bit. Awesome. So now we've got a really good bass rhythm, and we can open up the range of notes slightly if we want to. If we're not really happy with the way things are going, we can just give this a little random twist. And I've just realized I thought things were sounding a little bit weird, but this blue sequence is a bit longer than the pink one, which is why it's doing 2 bars. There we go. And we can just give this a twist again. So yeah, it's like a really good, easy way of just creating some sort of random sequence that's still quantized and falls in line with everything else. Now, obviously that's pretty repetitive, and if you saw the mistake I'd made before, then we could just grab this sequence and lengthen it. And now we get a 2-bar sequence where the notes are always the same gate for each bar, but the melody takes 2 bars to change. Let's take the final mult down the bottom here. I'll just use a more reliable cable. This mult, keep in mind, is a duplicate of our sequence, of our gate sequence. We'll plug that into trigger. Let's take a noise output, plug it to the input, and now we'll modulate the cutoff of our wasp filter with the second sample and hold. Awesome. And just to stop that sounding too stale, we'll whack it into a delay, just because sometimes delay can make everything sound better. Let's play around with these steps. So yeah, I think you've now seen at least some of the creative potential that you can get away with when using a sample and hold module. Of course, I've got other things in this system that can do sort of similar stuff with sequences like the RBSS over here, and there's even a Turing machine built into the EuroPi. But as I said before, I only have the one quantizer in the EuroPi. I don't have a quantizer anywhere else. So when I use the Turing machine in the EuroPi, using it for pitch usually sounds pretty atonal. I can really only use it to trigger things. So obviously it's a lot more helpful to use the RBSS into a quantizer, or this sample and hold method with the 2Auto into a quantizer. You also don't have to use the 2Auto like I did. I just find it really useful because I can twist the knob around. You could use anything like, a random LFO source, which we make using a noise oscillator and a 2 sample and hold, or you could use a sort of different shaped LFO over here. You could combine LFOs even in the B mixer section so that you're getting sort of weirder LFO shapes happening, and then plug them into your sort of sequence setup that you've got going on. With all of that said, I'm pretty sure that's all I have to say about the sample and hold module. So if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them down below. And for now, I hope that you enjoyed the demo patches I prepared for you. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, check me out on Patreon, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.